tātou. Ka pō, ka ao. Ka ao, ka kitea. Ka kitea, ka mohio. Ka mohio, ka marama. Ka marama, ka ora tātou. From darkness comes light. From light we can see. When we can see, we will know. When we know, we will understand. When we understand, we can grow. Nō reira, e te haere tonu ngā mihi mai o ha kia koutou katoa. E mihi anō ki te kāhui ariki o Tainui waka, ara ko tērā e noho mai nā ko tūheitia I runga I te ahurewa tapu o te kingitanga. Good evening and to us all. Again, a special welcome to those who have travelled great distances to be with us. Acknowledgements to the sponsors, acknowledgements to the recipients of various awards, and most of all, a great big acknowledgement to colleagues, students and relatives who make this conference what it is each year. So I'm here this evening as the breakfast speaker, I think. I want to begin by just saying that I'm going to pick and choose my way through some thoughts that I've noted here. It's so heavy that it fell off the podium. But I want to begin with a short story because it's not a short story, it's actually a serious introduction to my tribal background. I'm from Ngāti Pro, the East Coast tribe, and this is a story from our area when certain members of our tribe were travelling up in the clouds there. They were following some Australians, and the Australians came across the pearly gates and they rang the bell, and the St. Peter on the other side answered and said yes. The Australian said, "Can we come in, please?" And opened the bell, and St. Peter said, "I'll just have to ask the man upstairs." So I think it was a man, it could have been a woman. He walked upstairs and asked permission for the Australians to come in. And after, a great consultation, this Australian's a bit dubious, but however, we should let them in. So anyway, St. Peter went back down and duly opened the gates and let the Australians in. And then coming along behind the Australians were a party of our Ngāti Pro people, and they rang the bell, and St. Peter said yes, and the Ngāti Pro people said, "We're here, we need to come in." And St. Peter said, "Well, I'll just have to nip upstairs and ask the big question again." So he went upstairs and asked the question, and again much humming and hawing, and eventually access was granted. So St. Peter went downstairs to give the good news to the Ngāti Pro people, and he was down there for a while, and the next minute the phone rings back to upstairs, and God answers the phone and said yes, and St. Peter said, "They've gone, they've gone." And God said, "What, the Ngāti Pro people have gone?" And St. Peter said, "No, the gates." Which is, it's a tribal disposition about gatekeeping. So I want to begin this little sharing session this evening by making a couple of quick points up front, and then I'm going to jump all over the place to get through this as quickly as possible, because I know what it's like to stand between various people in this room and their socialising. All right, so I'm not going to speak long, and I want to make 2 points at the beginning. First, and I don't mean to be overly critical, but my work and engagement is really around the enactment of transforming activity. That's what I do for the most part. And so the comments I want to make to us all here is that, first, there is a need for more philosophers of education to be more intentional about building manifest and transforming outcomes of their work. In this sense, there is a need to balance our discursive emphasis with practical enactment of transforming outcomes. Second, I would encourage more members to take up the critical and intellectual work which is able to respond to a range of issues that fall out of the growing context of the neoliberal colonisation of the academy, of our communities, and of our societal cohesion. In particular, there is a need for a more critical response to the rise of the primacy of competitive individualism and a corresponding diminishment of emphasis on communitarian values and practices. Now, in the Māori and Indigenous sense, the emerging emphasis on competitive individualism might be interpreted as a new formation of colonisation, to the extent that it undermines our ability to enact our collective cultural practices and values. For example, the cultural notion of whanaungatanga, or extended family values and practice, is a way in which economically disadvantaged Māori families can mediate socio-economic disparities by enacting a social capital that's embedded in our cultural values of sharing, of reciprocity, of caring for each other, and so on. And so immediately there is a project for us as a community of Māori families in building the capacity of our cultural values and knowledge to enable these sorts of support and social capital elements to take effect. For Māori and Indigenous communities, colonisation hasn't gone away, even though many of us have understood and engaged with the traditional modes by which this has been perpetrated. Namely, the churches did it to us, the schools did it to us, and the state did it to us. That remains. The point here is that colonisation has not disappeared. It has more often simply changed shape. Another critical point is that the neoliberal economic forms of colonisation impact across New Zealand, within society, communities, and in institutional environments. Concepts that support and reify competitive individualism are held in place by hegemonic discourse, e.g. the autonomous chooser, individual rights, individual freedoms, privatisation, not just of institutions, but also of academic behaviour, and the accumulation politics notion of the possessive individual, trickle-down economics. These elements are not just problematic for Māori, they are problematic for all of us. What is challenging here is the detrimental impact that an overemphasis on competitive individualism can have on our social formations, societal cohesiveness, and our ability to collaborate effectively in communitarian ways. Accentuating individualism over social and societal collaboration is damaging of Māori cultural expectations around collective responsibilities derived from social formations such as whānau, extended family, hapu, sub-tribe, and our iwi groupings. The Academy also needs to be defended around the values of academic freedom, the critical conscience of society, and egalitarian principles related to access, participation, and success. Critical elements such as the commodification of knowledge, massification of education, curriculum hierarchies which reify the sciences, often at the expense of the arts, the uncritical rise of the techno-rational, all need critical reflection and action. While these two concepts of competitive individualism and social cohesion might be considered oppositional, they may both be considered important. A key understanding here is the need for balance and not overemphasising one element to the detriment of the other. The dialectical relationship between these two conditions is suggested by Freire in his 1972 quote, which reminds us that before you can free others, you must first free yourself. Elsewhere, David Liu, a PhD thesis student in 2013 at the University of Canterbury, has described the inextricable relationship between individual conscience and collaborative consciousness as an important part of societal development. As a closing comment to this section, I would add that the digital media and activities such as social networking and the like are not adequate substitutes for society or face-to-face social interaction. So now I just want to again share another story from the canons of the Ngāti Pro intellectual library and tell you about this particular story. This involves a cousin of mine who was once the Minister of Education, is no longer with us. And so I'm telling the story respectfully about him. And it's his times table when he went to school, traditional pedagogy. You know, go home, learn the times table, come back and trial by ordeal in front of the class, perform the tables. On this occasion, 3 times table, came back to the class in Tolaga Bay, where we come from. And away went, the teacher pointed out, put the dreaded finger on him, come to the front, and away he went. 3 1s are 3, 3 2s are 6, 3 3s are 3 4s are Before he could go much further, the teacher said, "Stop, Panikura, what do you think you're doing?" And as quick as a flash, he came back and he said, "Look, sir, I mightn't know the words, but I know the tune." So this little excursion in the next section is really about that. It's about, I guess, the relationship between thinking and enactment. So we've got to know the words in the tune if we're going to make a difference. So I want to put this here. I just want to share with you a couple of slides which, again, just introduce you to a few transforming projects that we're engaged in. Well, this, by the way, is the one, where I come from, our institution. So story 1, Captain Cook, Voyage of Discovery. Pacific Ocean is a connector, it's not a divider. Captain Cook sailed right round the Pacific Rim and made contact with several countries. But the story that I want to talk about is, when he travelled around, they renamed the environment, the landscape, and so instead of having harakeke, we had tenuis, folium, whatever the appropriate Linnaeus form of name was, and they renamed our world. So when we get to Hawaii, eventually Captain Cook arrives in Hawaii after this tremendous discovery, voyages and so on, and is killed by the Hawaiians. And I want to talk about that because in a sense there is a telling of the history of the Hawaiians that is in the textbooks and so on, which that Captain Cook was ambushed by the savage Hawaiians and killed. And so when I was in Hawaii recently, I had a reinterpretation of this given by an elder who gave a cultural reading of what happened. So the idea is this, or the story is this, that Captain Cook sailed into Kealakekua Bay, the ship was spotted, 2 camps. Over here was the sort of the health priestly camp on this side, on this over here, the village of Kamehameha. Kamehameha was away at the time. These 2 groups had been bickering about who was the most important in terms of the overall mana, who had the mana. And so what happened is that the chiefs, the health encampment and the chiefs went out, met Captain Cook, brought him, escorted him back in, and then proceeded to make a big deal of his arrival, because he arrived at the time of Lorna the Moon. They put him on a stage so that he could be seen by the other village, and they basically were thumbing their nose at Kamehameha that they had more mana than Kamehameha because the gods had come to visit them. So when the opportunity arose, eventually Kamehameha killed Captain Cook, and this is the gruesome part, so block me, yes, but sent his body to different parts of the kingdom so that everybody could see that Captain Cook was merely a human and that Kamehameha was a greater mana and status than Captain Cook. Vancouver came into the harbour, pointed his cannons at the village and said, bring them back. They did, and eventually Captain Cook was buried at sea. But the point of the story is that the cultural reading and the transformative work were part of a major research component done by the Indigenous community. I'm not going to tell you all these stories, but these are some along the way. Here's another one about, again, understanding the tension here between around the social construction of knowledge. But Te Māori exhibition in New Zealand was a whole heap of different iconic carving pieces that were stored in the bottom of museums, and because I went around with Hingangaroa need to pick out some of these pieces. Not that I'm an expert, I just happen to be a labourer of this process. But we went into the bottom of museums, removed sacking and pulled out these carvings, dusted them off, and anyway they were eventually assembled as an exhibition and sent off to the New York Metropolitan Museum of Art for display. They travelled overseas, and virtually overnight they magically turned from being old artefacts from the basements of museums in New Zealand to objects of art acknowledged on the world stage overnight. So somehow magically, to the point that when they came to be sent home, these objects could not travel on the same plane because no insurer would pay for the whole, for all of these pieces to travel in one, so they had to be spread out over several planes. And I often tell this story because it reflects the arbitrariness of knowledge in our New Zealand context. And again, it's a major turning point, if you like, in terms of treatment of knowledge. So there's the exhibition there. It was the second highest grossing exhibition after Tutankhamun and held that position until the Monet overtook it. I'll just nip through this. Ngāti Pro, we're known as the whale people in New Zealand, and we're very friendly towards the whales in that sense. A project that we were doing with another Indigenous population was this transforming of their school curriculum, rewritten to reflect their cultural nuance of the Nupia people in Barrow, one of the nearest villages to the North Pole. And they have a different perspective of whaling. And so they're allowed to take 20 whales a year under scientific supervision for their cultural purposes. And they have to catch them in a special way using traditional methodologies. So a good day is like 3 people in hospital and 1 life. But the enactment of this tradition is fantastic because it mobilises extended family groups who, and one of the traditions is that they have to bring the whale by hand onto the land themselves. Their rituals are conducted and so forth, and there's nothing that's wasted in terms of the food, and it feeds whole families in the village, and sometimes the reciprocity extends to other villages to store up, if you like, put food in the fridge for when they have plentiful food in the future, etc. So this next one is last week in the Murray Battalion C Company. So this is a research that, this is again a research that was done by Dr. Monty Suter at Massey University. So he researched the C Company, the East Coast, our tribe, their participation in the Second World War, and he produced a book. Out of the book, while it's a great history in its own right, it also stimulated a whole range of activity that has subsequently unfolded. So one of the things is that the C Company has visited, this year we took 50 of our elders and young people to visit the places where these soldiers have fallen overseas. In fact, we went to visit where Moana Ngarimu won his Victoria Cross in Tunisia. No one has been there since the end of the war, and we went there to visit. There is ritual that occurred all around it. While we were in Crete, at what a place known as 42nd Street, which was the site of a major battle, we came across an Australian Aboriginal family who were conducting rituals related to their family members who were involved in the war. I'll just share that with you, the Saunders family. There they are. This is in a place called Galatos. Right, so the important thing here is that the research has led to this activity, heightened activity, and also last week we opened a museum for the tribe. It's a knowledge house, which is again responding to the cultural nuance of what this means of losing our soldiers overseas and the responsibility that accrues to tribal members to remember them and to appropriately respect them. So, but the upshot is that a lot of the war activity removed a key layer of our leadership. Right, so again, the important point there is the thinking and the enactments. All of these stories have got that part in it. So the My development is another good story, I think, that's useful for others to hear about. So the My program is an initiative we took at the University of Auckland some years ago, and the idea was to develop 500 Māori PhDs in 5 years. If you consider that in the year that I came through, I was probably the only Māori in the year that graduated. So I can tell you that program was unsuccessful. It took us 7 years to get 500. And we're now very much into the second 500 students. Now, what's important here is that the program is a support program that's developed. Hang on. Oops. And with the writing retreats, support for supervisors, volunteer meetings, once every 6 weeks on a Saturday for the students to methodically work through their thesis work and so on. And this program has been now spread across several countries. So in British Columbia, it's in Vancouver, Kelowna, Prince George and Victoria. And over in Canada, they're known as the SAGE program, Supporting Aboriginal Graduate Enhancement, is the enactment. So all PhD students, native PhD students. The trick is, again in Hawaii, Alaska, New Zealand and Canada. In Australia, they were known as the Ozpods, but they're sort of fizzled and we're sort of working on trying to get them resurrected again. But the idea here is to not just create privatised academic success, but to develop, culturally and politically conscious students who will enact transforming activity and to make a difference. So that's all I wanted to say about that. And just by, so that we're not holding everyone up too long, perhaps just a couple of statements to finish on. So the first thing I want to say is that I want to re-articulate the shape of our collective struggle as Māori and the need to constantly reflect on and renew our understandings about struggle. And I use the term struggle here actually sort of picking up the idea that which Peter shared this morning, Peter Roberts shared in his session around also that struggle is about also doubt, and that it needs to win consent by a process of an aggregation, if you like, of the ideas at stake. So struggle is important as it provides clarity of what we stand for as well as what we stand against. Struggle can make us more focused, committed and determined to bring about change for most Māori and other Indigenous communities. So our struggle is now, and tomorrow is too late for us. Today, in that sense, is tomorrow. We cannot afford to continue to wait, to continue thinking about how we might or should react, to continue waiting for someone else to come up with the answer, to continue to rely on others to lead. In regard to our cultural survival, everyone must become a leader. Urgency is the utmost priority, to the extent that our talking should not be about what we might do, but about what we have done, past tense. And so our struggle is not one struggle. It is multiple struggles that occur in many places, often simultaneously. Our engagement has to be the same to many sites of colonisation, and often at the same time. We need to move beyond being the recipients of the single policy approach with respect to government intervention strategies. The fact that the majority of our people still remain socially and economically marginalised are evidence that selected policy formation has had limited effect. We must announce that selected and singular policy interventions are insufficient. There is no silver bullet, no magic pill, no single policy. There is need to invest in change on a broad range of fronts, what I call a 360 approach, and what others have called previously as holistic intervention. Some of these investments in change we need to take responsibly for ourselves, take responsibility for ourselves. Others are situated in the public policy domain. Our struggle is also with ourselves. It rests not just on the individual, but also on our families, on our communities, on our tribes, on our peoples as a whole. We must defend our cultural inclination towards collectivity, and to revitalise and re-empower our cultural ways of knowing, being and acting. We need to reinstate, value and practice the collaborative power that resides in the collective. We should not shrink from our cultural responsibilities, knowledge and practices. We must recenter the values of reciprocity, sharing, respecting each other as families, as tribes, as communities, as lifetime guardians of our environment. We must understand the tension that exists between individual rights on the one hand and communal responsibility on the other. It's not just about what I can do, but more about what we can do responsibly and collectively. And finally, our struggle is for our minds. There's a need to understand our own participation in forming our own domination, exploitation and oppression. We need to educate ourselves out of false consciousness and to free our minds from hegemony. Education has been a major factor in embedding Indigenous inferiority. We must reclaim the power of education to act in our interests. An important decolonising act, therefore, is to struggle over the meaning and intention of education and schooling. It needs to serve all peoples and not simply be a means to reproduce dominant cultural expectations at the expense of Indigenous and Māori interests, and also other minority interests. The challenge I've laid out this evening might seem a daunting task. However, I reflect here on the words of, again, an East Coast elder, Te Kania Takiro, a chief from my tribe of Te Aitanga Hauiti, who once stoically uttered, "E hara taku maunga I te maunga neke neke. My mountain does not move." My response tonight are the words of a feisty Ngāti Porou woman who said to me, after reflecting on this statement, "How do you move a mountain? You take a step towards it." My invocation to us all then is to go out and move mountains. Kia ora tātou.